Welcome to this Educast. You have to do it. Telecom Configuration Management. My name is Gary Audin. I'm from Delphi Incorporated. Today I'll be talking about the value, benefits, and problems we have with configuration management. And following my presentation, I'll be asking some questions of Teresa Dixon, who's Director of Product Management at Unimax. First, I'm going to discuss the components of configuration management, then how moves, adds, and changes, we're going to call them Max from now on, play a role in configuration management. But there's lots of problems, and the problems are not all new. A lot of them are very old because we've had to deal with moves, adds, and changes for many decades. What we're going to focus on is what can be done about these, the important considerations to think about when you want to, let's say, automate or provide self-service capabilities for configuration management, then go through the benefits. And I'd like you to wait to the end because we have some additional resources we're going to discuss that you could go to for demonstrations and information to help you make decisions about configuration management. We have 5 areas that we're going to discuss, moving into a 6th, which is the blue. First of all is the 5 areas of configuration management that deal with the access rules and policies. Who's allowed to use what and when? How do we assign those privileges or restrictions to those individuals? But we also have to get into the issue of how do we monitor that everything's working the way we set it up, because we may have times where someone's made a change that's unauthorized, or we should have closed down some feature or function that was forgotten. That leads into the 4th category, which is trying to reduce and eliminate abuse of features and functions. In other words, we may have a phone that's only allowed to make calls internally, and someone has reconfigured it so they can make international expensive calls. We then look into the area of security. And security is something that everyone worries about. It's not just IT security, which is what many people focus on, but telephony security is just as important. Doing this is costly. We are going to have repetitive moves, adds, and changes. We have to deal with this every day. We have to deal with this as our employees change. And what we're going to focus on for about the next 10 minutes is how do we reduce the cost and handle the repetitive Macs, because we can't avoid them. So let's talk about some typical Macs. The first on the upper left, phone creates and deletes. We're always going to be adding and deleting phones. It doesn't matter what kind of system we have. And when we offer phone service to employees and users, they ask for voicemail. They change. We may want to add multiple voicemail boxes to a particular phone because there's multiple users. Or we might want to have a function where multiple phones can access the same mailbox. Password resets and PIN resets are going to happen all the time. What we'd like to make sure is that they're done properly and that they're done in such a way that people don't guess the passwords and PIN resets. Function on the right-hand side, the single number reach settings, which basically says there's a single number identifying me. That number reaches me whether on my cell phone, an office phone in a new location, or my office phone, or even my home phone. So when you start thinking about single number reach settings, it starts getting into the areas of unified communications and collaboration. And as we add unified communications, we're going to be adding more features and functions for people to deal with. The problem with Macs is it costs time. It costs money. It's labor intensive. And one of the problems is this labor has been the telecom department. And that telecom department has lots of other things got to work on, and they're not inexpensive people. So we're going to try and figure out a way to move the cost from telecom to end users, or let's say to a help desk, which is a much less expensive way of supporting this functionality. Point is, it is a cost. And it's a cost which, if I put it off to the telecom department, is in a way not misusing, but underutilizing the capabilities of the telecom department. Now, if we also look at this and we find telecom is in the IT arena now, suppose that we're trying to do some new projects in IT. They may include communications projects, but if I'm dealing with moves, adds, and changes all the time, I'm distracting the expensive, very productive employees to something which is really high cost, low productivity on their part. We may even find as the volume increases for moves, adds, and changes, we have to pay overtime. So the more we can offload, the better off we are. But the third thing, which is usually a complaint, is how soon is my feature function enabled or disabled? So we're dealing with response times. And the closer we put this work of Macs to the self-service side of things, the faster the response time. The end user response time is their own response time. They're the ones who decide how fast things are done. So we can actually say to the end user, you do it yourself, it'll happen in seconds or minutes. You have to send it off to, let's say, telecom department. It may be days, even sometimes weeks, before we get someone to take care of this for you. Some of them might say, well, there are managed service providers out there. We could use them as well. That's an expensive way of doing things. It really doesn't save you money since that's cost that has to go external. So now we have to think about what we can do about this. One of the things is we want to avoid the use of high-paid engineers. We want to consider self-service or Tier 1 help desk, or possibly a combination of both to offload the Macs. When you think about the cost here, when the self-service employee does it, it's probably the cheapest way to do it. The Tier 1 is a little more expensive, but it's still a lot less expensive than telecom management people. And when we think about it, most moves, adds, and changes have traditionally been done by telecom. We want to now remove that function from them so they can spend time on more important projects. And self-service is not such a bad idea. If you think about it, with your cell phones and your tablets, you do a lot of self-service already, setting up phone numbers, buddy lists, downloading applications and the like. So that is not as foreign to people as it was, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago. So we can look at the self-service solution as being more viable today than it was in the last 10 years. One of the things that's real important is the interface we deliver to the self-service or to the help desk people should be as simple as possible, but we also should consider this. Besides being intuitive and easy to use, delivering an interface which only deals with the features that we want the self-service people to accomplish. If we give them too much, they end up creating errors, they get confused, and we tend to lose control. So we're trying to come up with an interface for self-service and the help desk that will avoid errors and problems. So now we move into what's called important considerations, and we have 5 of those to talk about. We've been discussing the offloading employees and the help desk, and that's really a sort of comfort question, is who you want to do the work. We want to make the interface simple enough that it's intuitive and doesn't require a lot of training. But there's something else you might want to think about. As your employees become more sophisticated, you may want to change the interface to add more self-service feature enablement. We want to make sure that training is avoided, because the more training we need, the more it implies complexity, the more difficulty we have in getting people to use it. So it should be a relatively intuitive screen and operation. The last is really not so much a technical question as much as a financial question. Do I want this solution on my premises within my data center, or do I want to use a cloud service? The first choice, putting it on my premises, I'm more capital expense oriented. I want to buy it. But you might want to consider the second possibility of saying, just have a cloud service, have resident features and functions for you. You still access it as an end user, self-service or help desk, but it's off premises, and therefore someone else manages the software. So that can be a different way of looking at the cost distribution. Now let's talk now the rationales behind doing all of this. One of the things is, when I see a lot of trouble tickets, I ask the question, is this a new trouble ticket, or is it a trouble ticket that's been redone because someone made a mistake? The better we make this offload work, the better we have one-time trouble tickets or work tickets, and we don't end up redoing and wasting time. I was at one site years ago where they did not handle their tickets very well, and 25% of their tickets came back to be redone. When we look at this, whether we do it by help desk or self-service, by avoiding telecom, we can generally improve the response time, so we get what we want done more quickly. When we reduce operational expenses, what we're really doing is reducing telecom department expenses, avoiding overtime, but also using people who are paid less than the telecom department. And usually in the telecom department, there's a small number of people with a large number of responsibilities, and this tends to distract them from a lot of the work they're doing. Security can be improved because if we get more people to set their own passwords, it's less likely those passwords will be known by anyone else or will end up being duplicates. Now, feature adoption is a very interesting question, because the more complex we make this, the fewer features the end user will take advantage of. Or we might want to have one group set up features for, let's say, the sales department, and a different set of features for the people who work in the warehouse, so that the feature sets are tuned to those individual groups, and one that would never be used by the sales department, which might be used by the warehouse group, becomes very productive. So that brings up a point here, and I'm going to introduce Teresa Dixon. Teresa is the Director of Product Management for Unimax, and I have a few questions for her. And the first one is, how does Unimax make it easy for telecom and IT departments to offload the Mac function? Teresa?
Well, thanks, Gary. Unimax actually has a couple of products for offloading Macs. Our Line 1 product is a configurable, web-based, self-service portal that can be deployed in the cloud or on-premise. And it's designed for employees to process their own Macs with no employee training at all. It's configurable so the telecom administrator gets to decide what an employee can view and change, so it's very controlled. Our Help One application, our Help One product, is a web application which enables Tier 1 help desk agents to immediately resolve certain phone and voicemail-related support calls without the assistance of telecom administrators or voice engineers at all. And then Unimax has a third full-featured system management product called Second Nature, which is used by telecom administrators and gives them the ability to more quickly process simple and complex changes, so improving response times overall. So to recap, Line 1 is an employee self-service product to process their own Macs. Help 1 is a Tier 1 help desk product for agents to process simple changes and to help Line 1 employees. And Second Nature is a full-featured product for telecom administrators to more quickly process both simple and complex changes or Macs.
Well, that brings up a question. You've got 3 solutions, 3 possible groups that can do this. What are the rationales for determining which group would be best to do this, like telecom or help desk or self-service management?
Well, I think you start by looking at the kinds of changes or the amount of changes that are processed monthly, and you take those, which ones are very consistent or repetitive type things, password resets, for example, and then what are you most comfortable with giving up control for? So password is a very simple, easy to use, zero training type thing that would be given to an employee. So Line 1 would be the product that you would use there. Whereas maybe you want creations of phones and mailboxes that are very consistent creations, and you think a help desk agent could do those. So the offboarding and onboarding of people could be used, the Help 1 product could be used for that, whereas more complex class of service or class of restriction type changes may be kept into the telecom administrator. So you look at those kinds of changes that are being processed, and also as a company, how familiar they are with self-service. I mean, does the employee already process some of their own self-service changes? And then put this, the link to Line 1 within an intranet or a place where they may be accustomed to opening work tickets in the past. So how familiar are your employees with already doing changes themselves? Those are some of the things, some of the rationales that you determine which product might be right for you.
Third question, are there other uses for this kind of self-service or help desk solution?
Yeah, for example, Help 1, I mean, you really can think out of the box here, Gary, a little bit. I mean, you could take a sales department, and they may have distribution list management, for example. They're constantly adding and removing people from distribution lists, but they're having to call the telecom department to have that done each time a new person comes in. Why not configure Help 1 to be a distribution list management type system so they can add and remove members on their own? That's one. Or like I talked about earlier, maybe the sales department, or it might be a tax company that has constant people turning over, onboarding and offboarding constantly during the tax season, for example. If an administrator within that department is allowed to create and delete phone and voicemail systems using Help 1 in a very controlled environment, that would save telecom a lot of money.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Do you have any additional resources that we might look at?
You can learn more about the employee self-service product, Line 1, or the help desk product, Help 1, by visiting some of the websites that you see on your screen. Unimax.com/Line1 is for Line 1, and Help 1, Unimax.com/Help 1. But there's white papers, there's videos, there's screenshots of the products. But also visit the Unimax videos channel on YouTube, and that has actually demonstration videos where it shows you exactly how the product works, and it walks through cases. There's probably a couple dozen of videos there depending upon what systems that you manage out of your telecom department.
That's interesting. You can almost try the product without having to buy it by looking at the YouTube.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for listening to our Educast. We have other Educast in the library at Telecom Reseller, and I look forward to offering new Educast to you in the future. Thank you very much, Teresa, and thank you, Unimax.